Hi class. In this video, we're going to go over loops and variables and we're also going to go over conditional statements. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am signed in. I'm in my working directory. I'm signed in as DevOps. So I'm going to open up code. I'm going to change to my working directory. So now that I'm in my working directory, I can open up the scripts that we're using today. I'll just do one at a time. So script 1 is just a simple loop. So I have one playbook with one play. This is the one play. If I were going to do something to a different host, I would have to create a second play, but we're only doing something to one play. So I have my playbook name. It's going to apply to this host. And then I have one task. And in that task, I use a variable called item. This is a predefined variable. Whenever you create a loop, the first time through the loop, item will be postfix. The second time through the loop, item will be devcaught. I'm not sure why my screen is flickering like that. So we're going to run this playbook. So I'm going to do to check I have no typos. Everything worked out well. Again, these tabs are important. Um, so a lot of times I see that people have their tabs wrong, so be careful with the tabs. So this is one dictionary item, and this dictionary item has a list. That's what those hyphens stand for. This is another dictionary item, and there's two items under that dictionary item. So let's execute this playbook. And so what this is going to do, it's going to connect to RHS2. It's going to install postfix. If it's not installed, upgrade it. If it has an older version, do nothing if it's already on the latest version. And then the second time through the loop, it's going to install dovecaught. Basically, postfix and dovecaught together is your email server. So it installed it. It went through this task twice. So let's go over to script 2. Now, instead of hard coding the values in the loop like I did for script 1, basically I assigned those items to a variable. Here's a variable, it's a dictionary item with two list items in it. And then my loop, I specify that variable. So in this particular task, what I'm going to be doing is starting those services. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure my script has no typos. Then I'm going to execute it. And basically it's just going to start those two services. So everything worked out. Those two services are started. Guys, I could go through and sign into that machine and do system control, status, post fix on RHS2, and then dovecot to verify those were running. But I'm just going to take Ansible words for it that it's running. Now script 3. What we're doing now is we're going to do something called hash with dictionary. So basically, when I set up my loop, this is one loop item in my list. See how I have a dash here and a dash here? So this will be passed as one item into the loop. And so it's going to be, again, we have our built-in variable called item that refers to the list inside of your loop. And I do dot name. And that will, the first time through the loop, will be Jane, and item dot groups will be postfix. And the second one will be um, item.name will be Joe, and item.group will be Dovecot. What we're doing here is just allowing Jane to be a postfix administrator and Joe to be a Dovecot administrator. So you can have very uh, robust loops with a lot of items being passed at one time to each iteration of the loop. I mean, every time it goes through, you don't have to pass one value, you can pass multiple values. So we're going to test this to verify that there's no typos. There's no typos, so now I'm going to execute it. So created the user account and added them to that group. Same for Joe. So let's look at our for script. Now, the book gives you a simple loop and then has you read, um, take the printout from the remote machine and display it on your screen. What Ansible returns is something called JSON data. I'm going to type it down here. I'm not saying this, I'm saying this. JSON is a format, a file format that allows you to transfer data from one service or machine to another. So if both machines can read JSON data, one machine can send the information to another machine. And it's normally in the form of, let me look at some images, in the form of this. But this is really printed out nicely. A lot of times it's just some big chunk of code. But there's a rhyme or a reason to this. Let me find an like here is an Avengers piece of data. In it, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Avengers. So you can pass Avengers and get that whole list of Avengers. And you see how this is in squirrely brackets, and then the Avengers are in square brackets. So it's a way to pass data from one machine to another. So when Ansible prints output, it prints it in this format. And this is not real easy to read as humans. So if you're dealing with a loop, it's going to get the printout for this and for this and put it in one big chunk. And it makes it not really readable, I think. So what the book does is it takes this loop and then just prints out this big chunk of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my terminal for right now. Okay, so I have one play and 1, 2, 3, 4 tasks. So here's what I'm doing. In this play, I am using the command module and I'm running this command. System control is active, then item. Those will be my variables from my loop right here. So the first time through the loop, it'll do postfix. Second time through the loop, it'll do dovecot. And then what it's going to do, and this is just me, but I created a variable called system control to match the output of that command. It could be anything you want. It could be Betty. It doesn't really matter. So it's going to take the output and save it in that variable. Now what the book does is this. It has you use the debug module. So this is my second task and just spits out that big chunk of JSON data. And I'll show it to you. And I'm going to open up a full command prompt so you can see it. And it's really big. It's convoluted and difficult to read. So just like right here on my example, this where it says Avengers, that's results in the JSON data that it kicks out. So what I did was just a little variation. Instead of kicking out this big chunk of data, I'm going to show you how to use Debug Module with a var item. So what we're going to be doing is kicking out one JSON chunk of data at a time. So, I have Avengers, and then I have one chunk of data here. Avengers, then another chunk of data. Well, in our JSON data, we're going to have two chunks of data. The output from the command for postfix and the output from the command for dovecot. So I'm going to loop through those two items. So basically, I'm going to look for this, then loop through this, then this, and display that data. And I could say item dot sub information, like I could do item dot rank or item dot name. But I'm just going to just show you the full chunk of JSON data for each individual service. And then what I'm going to do is using the debug module again, but this time I'm going to use the message instead of var and display item dot um, that stands for standard out. Standard out is your output that comes to the screen. So I just want to display just that. And again, I'm looping through those results. So I'm going to open up a command prompt and we're going to check this to make sure that there's no errors. APS, I'm on script 4. So I'm typing lab 4, hitting tab, hit 4 again, then tab again. So there's no typos. So there's my play. There's the facts gathering task. Show system control results. So I'm going to go back to show you what that task is. That's this task. It's going to just do a big dump of data with the results from both postfix and dovecot. And that's it. So look, here's my results. Just like Avengers. And then I have one for this command is active postfix. Then if I scroll down, there's standard outlines. So what actually got printed on my screen was the word active. And right here, standard out. So I could have looked for standard outlines or standard out. So this is just that big chunk of data. Now this was one item. You see my square bracket? No, sorry. See my square bracket for command? Just like this square bracket right here. Then here's my other item, which is command. Next, I'm doing system control is active dovecot. So there's my two items. This is the portion for dovecot. This is the beginning of the portion for postfix. And it takes a lot to read this. Now, I could take this output and put it in some JSON editor. And there's a whole bunch of editors online. Basically, you put in some chunk of data over here and it will display it nicely over here. So again, the purpose of JSON is to exchange data between two essentially incompatible systems. You're creating a common file format to allow those two systems to talk. So this is a big chunk of JSON data. It's not very pretty. So what I'm doing is show var standard out task. Let's go look at that task. That's this task right here. So instead of just displaying this one big variable, I'm going to loop through that variable. And again, anything when you do a loop is assigned to the item variable. So I'm going to loop through results, and I have two items under result. One command for postfix and one command for dovecot. And I'm going to display those individually. So my output's a little prettier. So here's my chunk of data. And this is how I'm displaying it. It's a little easier to read. The book doesn't do this. They do that one big chunk of data. So there is my standard out dictionary item. Excuse me, standard outline dictionary item. There's my standard out um, dictionary item. So in this JSON data, it's just full of dictionary items, just like this. That's a dictionary item. Value, colon, space, excuse me, key, colon, space, name. They're enclosing it in quotes, not necessary. So that's the first item for postfix. Now, this is the second time through my loop, and this is going to be for dovecot. This is the second command. And if I go through dovecot, if I go through the output, there's my standard out active and my standard outline active. So in my script, I could have done something like dot standard out. And that would have showed me for the first item the value of standard out, or I could have dot standard out lines. So either would have worked. And I'm kind of doing that on the next task. So let's look at the next task. Instead of using var, I'm just using debug with the message screen that just prints out a message. And it's showing me, again, I have a loop. The results of that loop are going to be saved in a variable called item. All loops are. Guys, back in the day, it used to be with underscore item. So earlier versions of this, the variable name was with underscore item. And if you read the book, it'll tell you how to convert to the newer format. I'm just using the newer format. So it's going to go through this loop. There's 2 items in this loop because results has 2 items. In this case, result had 1 item. A result had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. My result only had 2, command and command. So I'm going to go through the loop, assign the values for the first command to item, and I want to see the standard out data. Second time through the loop, the second command will be assigned to item, and I want to look at the standard out data. So let's go look at our output. So here's that name for that task. And there's the chunk of the data for the first loop. That was the actual data I received. Just like this. This was the data I actually received. And I displayed all the JSON data in a prettier format. But here I didn't want to see all the JSON data. I just wanted to see that value, active. Here's my second chunk of data for dovecot. But instead of seeing everything, I just wanted to see active. So this was the full data. This is the variable that I wanted it to display using the message in debug. For debug where I use the var, this is the full chunk of data, but I didn't specify a sub item under item. I didn't specify a sub dictionary. I just said, just show me the entire JSON data output because my script didn't have a dot standard out or dot something. It just says, show me the full JSON data for postfix. Then the next time through the loop, it shows me the full JSON data in a prettier format for the dovecot. This and this are the same thing. It's just this is prettier. There's my command. System control is active dovecot. System control is active dovecot. Then in here you'll see delta. Then you'll see N somewhere in here. Oh, right here's end. Failed equals false. I don't know where it's at. Oh, right here. And it carries over from this line. So this is just the same data, this and this, but this is certainly easier to read. If you don't do it through a loop like I did, here's gathering the data from the loop and just crunching it all together. If I just displayed all of results without going through a loop, it's just, you can't really understand what's going on. I think it's easier to read this than this. Okay, last script for lab 4. Now, in the book, they do a simple loop, a simple variable where they say you set a variable to true, and then it checks whether the variable is true and does some task. That's hard coding the variable to be true. So basically what I'm going to do is I wanted to do something more practical. So basically, uh, actually, I don't want to say that. A student did this. This is a script from a student that I stole off a student. Um, so a student did this. I told her to come up with something a little more advanced than what the book had. So what she did was one play. This play has 1, 2, 3, 4 tasks. This first task is just to stop the service to prove that it does work. So this is not really needed, but we wanted to stop the Apache web server before we did anything else. The next one is getting the status of postfix. If postfix is running, we're going to start Apache. And I'm just printing out what we're looking for. So because we're not in a loop, it just, when you say register status, I could have said register system control or whatever you wanted to put here. It can be any variable name that you want. It's just going to give me the value of that dictionary item. And basically it's going to do, let's look at this. Okay, so I'm going to do system control s um, is active SSHD. Maybe not. Okay, so I ran a program and it gave me some output. So I'm going to echo $, question mark. That shows me the return code. If I do make dir files, that directory already exists. So we have two types of return code, 0, then everything else. If it's 0, that program executed with no problem. If it was something else, it means there was an error. 0 is no errors, 1 through infinity means there's an error. So this had an error. So basically what this is doing is it's going to generate a lot of JSON data. But I don't want to look at any of that JSON data but the return code. This is the return code. In our case, the return code is 0. So it's going to give me all kind of JSON data that's really irrelevant to what I want. So what I'm going to do is do something called a hash, dot, and the value that I want. If it equals 0. Guys, what is the difference between status.rc equals 0 and status.rc equals 0? If I use one equal sign, that's an assignment. I'm assigning 0 to this variable. If I use 2, that's a comparison operator. I'm comparing the two. What is the value of this compared to this value over here? So one equal sign will assign the value. Two equal signs will compare the value. So basically in this, I have a task right here, and then I'm putting a condition on the task called when. When status.rc, and I'm assigning status up here, and I'm only looking at the dictionary item RC that goes under status, to if it's 0, then do this. If this isn't 0, if this was a 1 or any other value, it wouldn't do this task. So what we're doing is adding a condition to this task. And we're saying when to run it, when that equals 0. So instead of just having you set a variable to true, like the book does, and then execute something based on that, I actually had you query a service. If it's running, then start this. I think this is a little more realistic. Okay, guys, let's see. Your self lab. So guys, basically I gave you another self lab where you're going to create the user accounts. U5, U6, U7, and U8, 4 user accounts. But this time I want you to do it in a loop. And because I'm having you do multiple items, I want you to set the username and their full name, the comment field. So the username and their full name, I want you to set. So you have to do it with this type of hash. We're going to have username and then the comment field here. So it'll be U5, user 5, U6, user 6. And you're going to have one dash for those two items. And again, you're going to have to set your password in an encrypted file. You're going to need to create an rh1.contoso.com folder, then put your encrypted file called vault inside of that folder, just like you did in the last lab. Guys, I also told you that you might want to go through and write another playbook that deletes those 4 user accounts before you test yours. You don't really need to do that, but if you don't do that, um, it's not going to make any change. You shouldn't get any errors, but it shouldn't make a change. So as long as you're comfortable with not making change, don't worry about deleting them. But if you really want to see it work, delete your user accounts first and then redo this lab. Okay, that's it for this video. I will see you in the next video.